Wow, what a room. Thank you, President Tepper, faculty, staff, and Board of Trustees, and amazing student leaders. But really, hello, graduates, and everyone who has helped get you here. When I look out at you, a group of students who are about to be launched into the world, I want two things for you. Of course, I want success, but I also want belonging. You know that feeling you get with certain people in certain places where you feel like home, like you felt here at Hamilton, or maybe at the little pub? Because finding that feeling, it gets harder after college. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, and along the way give you 3 tips that I help you find both success and belonging. So I'm 11 years old, it's 1979, and we're in the middle of the Iranian Revolution. Sorry, I'm short. Chaos, martial law, executions, riot, that's the backdrop to my 5th grade year. And my father has just been promoted to be the president of the International Bank of Tehran, a bank in which Chase Manhattan, today's JP Morgan Chase, held a major stake. Neither I nor my family had any sense of what was to happen to us. Being associated with an American bank was not a particularly popular thing in this window. Bad timing really doesn't begin to cover it. So one morning, my dad and his colleagues are rounded up and held under house arrest by men with machine guns who are no older than many of you. I remember visiting him. The house where he was being held prisoner belonged to a family who had left Tehran having fled overnight, having left everything behind. My mother, she would bring home-cooked food, and I would disappear into the bedroom of the child who'd left his toys and comic books to read them, play with them, while the men in the other room stood guard. A few weeks later, my father and his colleagues were released. The law had changed in Iran and Tehran pretty much daily. So we breathed a huge sigh of relief. And then we heard that my father was going to be blacklisted, which meant that he would no longer be able to leave the country. Now, our family pushed my dad to get out, go on vacation, just for a little bit, just in case, they said. But my father, he had reservations. He was really tied to his country, his home, the place that he felt he belonged. But he gave in. So we went to the airport, taking our chances, my mother, my father, and me, with just two suitcases because we were going on vacation. We didn't go with my 3-year-old sister. She stayed behind with my grandparents. We planned to return. Now, I don't remember a lot about that day. I really did think we were going on vacation. It was something we often did in the summer. But after we checked in, while in the boarding area, my father's summoned on the loudspeaker, and I sensed my mom really get tense. A couple minutes later, my father returns with a big smile on his face, one he always had, which was very charming, and he said, "We're fine," and we board a flight to Paris. By the end of the summer, it is clear that we are not going to be returning to Iran anytime soon. So my grandmother, she brings my sister to Paris, where we end up living for a year. Realizing pretty soon that we're going to need a more permanent home, we relocate to the United States to start over. I was going to start middle school in America. In the middle of the Iranian hostage crisis, that, I can tell you, was not popular. Every night on TV, at a time where families gathered to watch the nightly news, which is probably hard for most of you to believe, there was a countdown on TV counting down the days American hostages were held, broadcast live into every living room, night after night, for 444 days. Perfect timing. So let me tell you what I did not feel: belonging. But I was young, and I eventually found my way. But my father, I don't think he really ever did. Not in America, frankly, not anywhere after Iran. So fast forward, I'm a sophomore in college, and I'm beginning to feel my stride. I have some friends, I know where things are, and he comes to visit me in college. He's decided that he wants to go back to Iran, just for a visit, he says, to see his mother and his sisters. Now, he knows he's blacklisted by this point. We all do. so this is pretty much a terrible idea. But he went anyway. I think part of him always missed home, that home that feels familiar, where you belong. That was also him, reckless and romantic in the best possible way. So upon landing in Tehran, his passport is confiscated. No surprise. He wasn't fazed. He ended up staying there for nearly a year. When a bureaucratic accident leads to his passport being returned to him, he decides that maybe he should take his chances and leave the country again. Now, he can't leave from the airport, so he arranges to get smuggled out through the border of Pakistan. A few days later, we meet him in Geneva, my mother, my sister, and I. The plan is to get him his green card, get him to America, and finally have our family back together again in one country. But when we get together, my father says, we should extend this trip by a few days. You're going to go back to college in a week, and then I won't see you until Christmas. So let's rent a car and just have a little holiday. That sounds pretty good. So we find ourselves at a lakeside resort. The next morning, it is a beautiful day. Crisp air, clear, sunny skies, and my dad announces that we should go windsurfing, something he'd learned to do while we lived in California. So my sister, she sits at the side of the lake and watches him glide out onto the water. My mother and I, we go into town to buy bathing suits. When we come back, there are emergency vehicles everywhere, and we quickly learn that they're there for my dad. Smuggled out through Pakistan, drowned windsurfing a week later in Switzerland. I was 19. A week later, I start junior year in college because the one thing I'd mastered by this point was motion. So tip number 1, there will be messy parts, maybe not as cinematic or as dramatic as mine, but you will have them, we all do. Remember, the only way is through. One foot in front of the other, one step at a time. So I graduate from college, and I was laughing at what you said, without a job or a plan. That was a little terrifying. I had student loans, but I was determined to have a career that I could believe in. So I move home, I get a job, and I save enough to be able to buy myself a few months, and then I move to Argentina, a country in economic and political turmoil where I knew not a single person. But I went with an idea. What if I became a foreign correspondent? So after landing and after being ripped off by the taxi in Buenos Aires, which is generally a rite of passage there, I discovered that they're shooting a big Hollywood film in town, Highlander 2, the movie, with Sean Connery, who is the original James Bond. Now, I think this is going to be my big break. I'm going to sneak into the production office, I'm going to land a story, and then I'm going to use that story to get a job at the English language newspaper, the Buenos Aires Herald. So I figure out where the production offices are, and I show up. When I arrive, I walk up to the receptionist, and I hear myself say, "I was told you were hiring." I have no idea where these words came from. It wasn't true. I hadn't been told anything. But guess what? Those words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. "Wait here," she says. It turns out the film company had just fired a bunch of people, and coincidentally, I'd walked into the office in the exact moment they needed replacements. Finally, good timing. So I land a job. I go to Argentina to be a foreign correspondent, but I end up working on a Hollywood film set instead. Now, fast forward, I go to graduate school. A friend sees a book I've made for fun, yeah, I was way a nerd, of travel columns I'd written for my college newspaper, and I'd combined them into a book with an advertising campaign that belonged to The Gap, when we all shopped at The Gap. He sees this book and he says, "You should send this to Mickey Drexler, the CEO of The Gap. He just spoke at our retailing class, and I think he'll like it." This is before the internet. I package up the book, I write a letter to Mickey, and I mail it to Gap headquarters addressed Mickey Drexler, CEO. A few weeks go by, it's finals, and I'm at my desk studying, and the phone rings. "Is this Maryam?" "Yes." "This is Mickey Drexler." "What? Was I being pranked?" I didn't end up going to work at the Gap. at the Gap, but I did have a conversation with Mickey. And that conversation, him telling me that this was a marketing idea, it showed me a path I didn't know existed, a career that I could genuinely be interested in and one that helped me pay the bills. Now, let me tell you something. I had a lot of what-if ideas. And since I wasn't worried about being cool or being rejected, I acted on them. I sent a lot of letters. Most of them went unanswered, but this one did not. What made me think that I could send a letter to the CEO of a billion-dollar company and that he would respond? I have no idea. But he did. And so if this can happen to me, and I know it can be uncomfortable, there is a version of this story waiting out there for you. Which brings me to tip number 2. Don't wait for perfect. Don't wait for permission. Don't self-reject. Don't talk yourself out of it. Just go do it. For the next 30 years, I did everything I just told you to do. I kept moving, I showed up, I didn't hold back, I worked hard, and I hustled. My career, it was successful, but it wasn't enough. Turns out corporate hierarchy is not a community, and a title, it's not gonna hug you back. So I kept moving, and then I stopped. In fact, the world stopped. It was August of 20, COVID had hit New York City early and hard. There were lots of headlines that said, New York is dead. So I email 20 friends one morning, and I say, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of these stories. What if we got on a Zoom just to see if we could figure something out? That was the whole plan. We raised a little money, paid artists a stipend, $100, and we produced pop-up concerts to remind ourselves and the world that we were very much alive. One of the first ones that we organized was a moment for Broadway. 24 Broadway performers, almost all of them Tony winners, gathered on the red steps of Times Square and sang one song. That moment, it blew up all over social media and in a lot of the newspapers and media, all the way to Japan. By then, there were 700 of us together trying to save our city. Work we were all doing for free allowed us to find purpose out of despair. We also found something we weren't even looking for: community and belonging. Coming out of COVID, I had another what-if idea. What if we got to know our neighbors? An invitation. We'll bring the tables and chairs. You bring friends and food. So we set a very long table down West 21st Street in Chelsea, New York, the block where we live. We canvassed the neighborhood. We didn't know if this was going to work, but we left no stone unturned. That first year, 500 neighbors showed up. 4 years later, 2,000 show up. That one table has inspired others. This year, there'll be over 100 longest tables happening across the country. That table says one thing: you have a seat right here. Recently, at one of the longest tables in Chelsea, I met a woman. She told me that she'd recently lost her husband and she was nervous about coming alone. At check-in, someone had overheard her story and said, "Come sit with us." As she's telling me this story, she's sitting with her new friends at the table, and tears are streaming down her face. That invitation, "Hello, come join us," it had made all the difference. One person noticed another person and said, "You belong here. You matter." So this brings me to tip number 3. Be intentional about belonging. Create it for others. That's actually how you're going to find it for yourself. So, I was moving so fast, I never even stopped to notice what was missing. I don't know that I would have had COVID not forced us all to stop. But this chapter, it led me somewhere I never planned, to something I didn't even know I was looking for: belonging. So here's the thing about belonging. It's not soft, and it's not a nice to have. It's right after food and shelter in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's the single greatest predictor of well-being, more than wealth, more than status. And right now, there's a loneliness epidemic, and division is everywhere. So I want you to have success, whatever that means for each and every one of you. But I also want you to find a place where you belong. So remember that girl who moved here in the middle of the Iranian Revolution from middle school? She stuck out like a sore thumb. The one who wasn't sure there was a seat for her at the cafeteria table. She finally stopped looking for one. She set a table, she said hello. She pulled up a chair for someone else, and 2,000 people showed up. You won't find belonging. You actually have to create it. So set a table, say hello, and pull up a chair for someone else. Congratulations, class of 2026.